Good evening, everybody. As I, Nick, Pennsylvania, I am here as I always am with my good friend Brendan Bond. Good evening, Brendan.
Good evening, Nick. How's it going, bud?
It's going real good. Now, I have to say, we're not really out of the spooky season.
No, the spooky season is always in our hearts, isn't it?
I would agree. And on my mind. On my heart and on my mind. But no, we've gotten a lot of comments from new people who checked us out thanks to the Hemlocks, the Hellbenders. And that was really good. And a few people mentioned that I kind of went off on a little bit of a tirade about, okay, all right. We all know, if you've heard us before, you've probably heard me say that when our friend Mike started this all up, he invited me because we like sharing stories, but he said you don't believe in anything, which is, not really true,
Not
but
entirely true, but
not
yeah.
entirely true. But there's one thing that I don't care to entertain. Although we did find it very entertaining today preparing for our conversation, and that is there are quite a number of human-made lakes through damming, through different flood control measures, through however you want to come about it. Man-made lakes with lake monsters, cryptid monsters, Loch Ness type things, and
Mm-hmm.
again, I get a bit
Sure.
hot under the collar about the whole ordeal because again, where are they coming from? Okay, if
Mm-hmm.
it is a human-made lake, maybe from a dam, and that you can get
Right.
fish through by that way, but
Mm-hmm.
usually these places are stocked. Who is out there stalking these water monster things, these cryptid beings? Like what mad scientist is lurking out there? Because it's not like these are small things. If you're
Mm-hmm.
going to have a cryptid, an aquatic cryptid, go big.
Go big. Yeah, go big or
Needs to
home.
be so. We went. Well, I in particular went off on that. It's just a thing I find is very silly. And so we were chatting the other week, and we said, well, you know what? What are some more of these? Because we know in our neck of the woods, those being Penn's Woods in Pennsylvania, there is Raystown Lake. It is one of the larger man-made lakes in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and there's
Mm-hmm.
Raystown Ray, who we might touch upon today. So
Mm-hmm.
we were saying, well, what are some other man-made lakes that have mythical creatures and supposed sightings surrounding it?
Mm-hmm.
And so we both independently set off on a path. I wasn't particularly good about saying what I had found, but here's my methodology. And then I want to hear yours because you
Yeah.
hinted at it a bit. I went out there into the wilderness and I looked up, well, what are the largest lakes, man-made lakes
Mm-hmm.
in North America? And I'm happy to report that upon following up on 15 of them, very few of them actually had people saying they were seeing cryptid in the
There's
waters of
some kind
these
of
man-made
yeah.
lakes.
Yeah.
So I must say I was reassured a little bit because I find it silly. But there's another part of me that wonders a lot of these stories are these being created for publicity. Now, somewhat famously in our hometown area, let's say a more prominent town within the county we live, there is an inn, a restaurant that there was, oh no, I'm sorry, it's a movie theater. There was a movie
Mm-hmm.
theater when we were in high school. There was a group trying to get it reopened, and they had a contest to write a ghost story
Mm-hmm.
about the movie theater. And the story that won started to be promulgated as being a true story.
Mm-hmm.
I distinctly remembered this deliberate deception on part of
Mm-hmm.
this group restoring this old movie theater, which is around, and occasionally you hear people say it's haunted because it's old. I
Right.
kind of think a lot of these stories are much the same, but so that was my methodology. What are the biggest
Mm-hmm.
ones? Because certainly the biggest ones are gonna, be more fodder because there's just more terrain for such a thing, a fish to swim about in. What was your methodology for finding
Yeah.
some of these? Because ultimately, we
Mm-hmm.
didn't communicate very well because we stumbled upon a couple of the same
A few that were the
ones.
same. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think that like what you look at as absurd with this kind of falls into, like you said, the category of like natural creatures, whether they are either undiscovered current like new species or they are like relic populations of thought to be extinct species, kind of like Loch Ness, and people think it's a plesiosaur or something like that. Or even if they think that it is some sort of like a landlocked whale, or something like that. There's also like the paranormal side, which is things that certainly aren't real in the sense that, well, not to say not real, but things that are certainly not relic species or operating as flesh and blood aquatic creatures. So I really kind of wanted to look at things from that kind of standpoint of kind of covering all of the different options that we kind of have, but sticking with the idea of it being man-made. Because when I first started, I was like, let me start with just like quote unquote lake monsters and see how many there are of those, and then kind of whittle down the man-made stuff as far as looking at their habitat, you know. Um, so there are dozens and dozens of dozens that I found, quote unquote lake monsters in the United States. Some of them are really well documented, and some of them are nothing more than a few sentences on a page somewhere. Majority of them, obviously, somewhere kind of in the middle. There was only maybe a dozen or so that kind of fit the criteria of man-made lake monsters that had enough either reported sightings or history or just kind of like folklore surrounding them. I thought to be kind of like fun to look at. I kind of zoomed in on two or three that I thought were just particularly interesting and kind of ran the gamut as far as natural creature, relic species, paranormal. I did stay away from anything that had like a like spiritual kind of element. I did run into a lot that had like a lot of like native stuff associated with them, which I didn't feel kind of right, kind of shoehorning into this kind of like fun conversation because I don't know enough about it and couldn't find enough information on them anyway. So I kind of went from the other direction. I started with monsters and then was like, okay, which one of these are sitting in reservoirs that were made in the 70s?
Yeah, and one of them in particular
Yeah.
we both looked at was a lake that was created in the 60s, late
Hmm.
60s. So, okay, so that was your methodology. So
Yeah.
I want to open up this
Hmm.
conversation by showing you a video that it was
Okay.
put on a news out in Idaho. Um, I'm gonna bring this up real quick. I just want you to watch it, and I want you to give me your honest opinion, and then I'm gonna say something about these sightings in general
Okay.
following that.
While Nick's bringing this up, we will put this link in the show notes. So if anyone out there wants to watch it, when you're not driving or anything, feel free to bring it up and give it a look. So the clip is titled "This is proof a monster exists under a popular Idaho lake."
This is Lake Piet, I believe. This is in McCall.
Okay.
Let me.
I did not come across this, so this is gonna be fun.
Okay. So, thank
So for those of you who haven't watched this video yet, towards the end of it, someone asks some cliff jumpers if they are going to jump in, and the lady rightfully responds, "Heck no."
Yeah, I'm gonna say that. Okay, all right, all right.
So
Before I say anything,
let's
I
describe the
want.
video real quick. Yeah.
Well, no, let's not describe the video. I think describing, I getting your honest. Let's not waste time with that. Getting your honest feedback is going to be a description of the video, effectively.
So it looks like a bunch of bubbles and something under the water. It's so hard to tell from that video if there is anything like people seem like they're reacting to something, but as far as like the effectiveness of it being captured on video, it looks like some bubbles in the water and maybe something light colored.
At
But
one point,
yeah.
it looks like there's a large white thing, like a catfish rolling
Or
under the
yeah, or
water.
a carp, or yeah, anything. Yeah, there, you can tell there's definitely something there,
Right.
which again, if our criteria is if we're setting the bar now for a lot of the images and videos we're going to look at tonight of just is there something there? The answer is yes, there is
Yes.
something there. there is something there, but again, the thing that gets me in this video is like a lot of reactions that you get from people who see things like this. People are definitely seeing something that they're not sure what they're looking at. Like that's happening.
Yes, and that's driven home by the point. And again, if you've not
Yeah.
seen it yet, Brendan has described it fairly
Hmm.
well. There's some bubbles, and at one point you see there's a white thing. And
Yeah.
that's about all. We know that they are not sure what they're seeing because, and I'm not trying to, deride this person,
Hmm.
but there is a lady that asks the question, "What is that?" about 8,000 times in a minute
Hmm.
and a half long video, which you've established the problem. We don't need to keep riding that horse.
Yeah.
We don't know what that. No
Yeah,
one's
we don't know what
answered
it
you.
is. Yeah.
We, say it. I give you twice. But yeah, okay. So here's
Is that a man-made lake? Because I did not look that one up.
you know what? I do not believe
Not
it
sure.
is. I do
Okay.
not believe it is. But that is irrelevant to what I'm gonna say here, which
Yeah.
is that I think a lot of these sightings
Hmm.
are, as you say, people are seeing something. They are seeing
Yes.
something that
Yes.
they don't typically see.
Hmm.
Growing up with a pond in my immediate backyard
Hmm.
and most of my day revolving around it as a child, I have seen carp do weird things like lay out
Hmm.
in the sun and then dart back into the water. Bizarre
Hmm.
behavior. You see fish that aren't really that big, but make a lot of commotion.
Oh, for
You don't,
sure. Yeah.
right. And if you aren't, we learned about one person that responded to the Raystown Lake thing.
Hmm.
Remember the canoe story and saying it was just
Yep.
so big it went under the
Hmm.
canoe? I can definitely see that being a carp, a catfish. I
Hmm.
have been on the St. Lawrence where there's like pike and muskie, and they are impressive fish.
Hmm.
They're not cryptids, they're
Right.
not
They're not correct. Yeah.
supernatural. But I remember, again, something we talk about tangentially a bit is our love of fly fishing.
Hmm.
I remember the very first time I caught a brown trout on a dry fly. It
Mm.
was a wet, rainy, miserable day. It was the perfect day to be
I was gonna
out.
say, sounds great.
It really was. I remember it very well. I caught, she was maybe 5.5 inches. Not a big
Hmm.
fish. When she took that dry, the dry had just gone underwater. My cast was
Yeah.
swinging on along a bank and it just dipped. Scared the hell out of me.
Right.
Absolutely. You
Hmm.
and I remember we
Oh,
were
yeah.
at Muddy Creek or Mud Run right
Hmm.
below Parker Dam in
Oh,
central
yeah.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah. I know. Yeah. I remember
Almost
this.
the same exact thing happened. We
Yeah.
didn't see a fish all day. I essentially threw a fly into a puddle.
Yeah.
Scared the fish,
All
scared me.
scared all three of us. We all jumped.
We
Yeah.
all jumped.
Everyone was surprised that the fish was there, including the
It was a
fish.
surprise encounter, right?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
look at that video, and what I'm thinking is there is a large fish, and it's doing a large fish thing
Hmm.
that these people don't normally see.
Hmm.
And I understand it's fascinating. Fish are weird, fish can
Hmm.
be big, and that's about the end of it. What do you think? I
Yeah.
kind of think a lot of these sightings about a lot of these things, that's what they are because one of these lake monsters that we both encountered,
Hmm.
some people say it's the size of a limousine. Now, come on, let's get real.
That's a big, yeah.
How did it get there? How did it get there? What is it? And what is it eating to maintain that size?
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
problem with Loch Ness.
Hmm.
Is that
Yeah.
maybe there was something there? Maybe there was, but what if it's dead? What if it's probably dead now? How many
Right.
times are they going to scan that lake? How many times do biologists
Yeah.
have to say this just really isn't the type of body
Of water
of
that,
water
yeah.
that's, yeah, conducive to holding something that large for
Hmm.
such a long time?
Right.
So there's where I'm at.
Well, no, it's interesting because I think again in this video, like you said, this is not in a man-made lake, but it is a good proxy of how people probably generally react to seeing things they're not familiar with seeing. And again, that's a legit experience people are having, and it could be a rare and cool experience. That's not to take away from that, but it's not to say that it is necessarily a paranormal experience in that sense. Now, that is one of the cool things that's kind of the other side of the coin with a lot of these experiences. With some of the stuff we're going to talk about tonight, I know with at least two of these creatures, if it is even like let's say this isn't these aren't paranormal, but these are mundane, naturally occurring, known creatures, it's still really cool that people are having these experiences. Like I think that context needs to be kind of reiterated. Like we mentioned with Raystown, one of the stories that they had was when the people were doing the fishing with the fluorescent lights or the glow lights under their boat. Basically, the long story short is people are using these lights to fish in this lake at night, and they have something that they say is 15 feet long come up and try and get to the lights and eventually bump their boat, and it's this really like harrowing experiences that people have. Let's say it wasn't a 15-foot long plesiosaur, but let's say it was a 6-foot catfish, a blue catfish, which, can be a few 100 pounds and can
Right.
be,
Pretty
huge.
aggressive.
Yeah, it can be aggressive feeders. That's still a wild natural experience that's super cool and worthy of a story.
Absolutely.
Whenever we're kind of like giving some of these people a bit of a hard time, it's not so much that they had these reactions or that these experiences aren't important. It's just that some of them on one side are probably more mundane from an explanation standpoint, but are still really cool experiences and can be talked about through that lens in a way that's still really useful, fun, and tells us a lot about the culture and the natural history of a place.
Yeah, so kind of getting onto that, I want to bring up the place we accidentally both looked at, which is Lake Norman. It's in
Yes.
Southwest North Carolina. If you're looking at it, it's Southwest Carolina. That's all I'm
Yeah.
going to say, North Carolina.
Yeah.
But it was created at the very end of the 1950s, and I think it
Hmm.
was full by mid 1964. It's
Yeah, that's what I found
used
too. Yeah.
Right, used to provide hydroelectric power to the region, but it has a supposed monster. And one of the great things, that monster's name is, it's Lake Norman.
Yeah.
Let's call it Normie.
Which is a great name. It's a
It's a great name for people that appreciate not trying.
yeah, people who appreciate a real simple like Normie is they spent all of 5 minutes
Yeah.
workshopping that one.
Yeah, we
Um
stayed up all night, but I think it was worth it. So one
um
of the great things about that I like about it is you can go to lakenormanmonster.com where you can,
yeah,
yeah, it's a cute thing. You can buy Normie the DVD, the
yeah.
children's storybook. The best part though, is you can submit sightings, and there are quite
Yes.
a
There's a
few.
ton of them.
And I read quite a few of them, and I
Yeah.
know you pulled a few that you like in particular, but
Yeah, yeah.
and this was reported anonymously back in 2020. I just want to read this, and I want to stress just how much this reflects like what I've been saying. So, again, going back to, I think it's July or August of 2020, not a sighting, but heard an extremely large being splashing in the water while sitting on my Airbnb dock. My boyfriend and I were about to head in when the sound came from across the dark void of the lake. We had heard no humans talking before this. The ripples were so sudden and thrashing, I got spooked and ran into the house. I don't know what it was, but it was huge and it made a lot of splashing in the water, and there were no human sounds beforehand. So, okay, you heard a lot of splashing.
A lot
Could
of
be
splashing.
fish feeding, could be an otter. I don't know if they have them down there, but I,
Hmm.
I imagine they do. It could be a bear. It could be anything. You didn't hear human sounds, which means like a bear might be a little more.
Yeah, a little louder.
But it boils down to I heard splashing and
Hmm.
not people. I went inside. Not putting this person down, but when you boil it down to that,
Right. This is, yeah, it's not one of the better pieces of evidence for the existence of Normie.
What is it
Um,
evidence of?
yeah,
Rampant
splashing.
splashing, phantom splashing?
So so I picked out a few that I thought were, again, like you just mentioned with that example, a good smattering of, because again, we're talking about Normie here, who again is just like we said, is kind of like the kind of a quintessential plesiosaur-esque.
It's green, has a
Yeah,
long
it's
neck.
yeah, like when you think lake monster, you're thinking of Normie. I picked out a few like short sightings, or kind of like this one, that I think like you could be talking about almost any lake monster in the country.
Maybe that's
When
why the name is Normie. It's Normie,
right,
the normal
yeah,
monster.
this is
You
yeah,
got a
he's
monster in a lake? Well,
yeah,
this is about
it's
as normal as it gets.
yeah, it's yeah, it is. He is a C plus straight across the board, 3 out of 5 stars. Like
Right.
on,
I would
he
go if I was in the neighborhood. I've had better. I've
yeah,
done worse.
yeah, like it's so. But that being said, it's really endearing that I love that, again, on this site that we mentioned, lakenormamonster.com. But there's a ton of other sites and other things. There's like they have events and they have all kinds of stuff. But people really like, whether Norman exists or whether Normie quote unquote exists or not, the fact that people get this excited about a natural resource and some possible folklore around it, I think is a cool thing, and it makes me happy.
Sure.
So
I agree. I do think a lot. Okay, I
yeah.
let's cut to it.
So yeah,
Let's hear the
so
best sightings you came across.
So I came up. So I'm going to get through a few real quick. So this one has a photo attached to it, which is pretty cool. A lot of these monsters do have photos, and when you think of like the rogue wave photos from Loch Ness, picture that. That's what you're seeing.
Okay,
Um,
can you pull that up so I can see?
yeah. Let
Well,
me send
awesome.
it.
Because
Yeah,
I
let me
know you're
send
gonna
it
link
to you.
them, you're gonna put them
Yeah.
up and all that jazz.
This is recent. This is from August 24th of this year. And so this anonymous person says, I was in my home in the North Shore of the lake. There was a super moon, so I got up very early to see it. I was enjoying my coffee on the back porch as the sun was just starting to light the water. I saw a long strip of black out in the lake. It was going fast, and I thought it was probably a string of geese whose shadows were all together, making it look like a large object. It was traveling fast, though, faster than you would expect geese to swim. It continued to move, swimming like it just had its back out of the water. I thought maybe it was an alligator, but it would be a very large one as it was at least 15 feet long. I found this post when I looked up alligators here in the lake. As I watched, it became obvious this was not geese or ducks. Weird. I get a picture at the last second before it got out of my sight, but it was just at the end and it was just starting to look like a black streak in the water.
Okay, I'm looking at this picture and it looks like a wake.
It looks like a wake.
Like now, again, if they're awake, you would see consecutive little
Right.
waves
So it's
here,
hard to
but
tell with a photo. Yeah.
it's hard to
But
tell. Again,
but
it could be just about anything, but I do want to say, I do really like Kayla in the comments. Yikes, do people swim in that lake? I saw on HD TV that people do. No way I would
I ever,
ever.
yeah.
And you know what? I believe that, Kayla. I
Yeah.
believe that Kayla is reluctant to swim in any natural body of
Body of
water, and
water.
that's all right. That
Yeah.
is all right, Kayla.
But with this anonymous poster, I do like the fact that they brought up that they originally thought it was one thing, and then the more they looked at it, they were like, oh, is this something else? And that seems to be a common thread you see in a lot of these sightings where someone goes, oh, that's a thing, and I know what it is. But the more you look, the weirder it gets, until
Yeah.
your brain kind of, and we see that with a lot of paranormal stuff where people see a light or see a thing in the woods or see something, and their brain after a few moments goes like, wait, that's not what I think it is. What is that?
Well, and I
um
do like how they say it could have been an alligator. Now, again, that's not crazy because
it's
here in the
not,
Pittsburgh area, we've had a few alligators that were in
mm-hmm,
the news and captured. It wasn't like people were reporting it and then never saw it. They were captured alligators that
mm-hmm,
have been released into, I know there was one in the Youghiogheny River.
yes,
15 feet is not outside of an
right,
American alligator, so it is possible.
right,
Or,
yeah,
or
mm-hmm,
it's possible that it was just a large fish
mm-hmm,
that was
yeah.
kind of came up to the surface.
Right.
You know,
Because
I've
again,
watched his carp will kind of suck up air from the
they will.
surface of yeah. It's
Hmm.
weird. It makes a weird kissing noise.
It does. Yeah, absolutely it does. Here is another sighting. This one is by Ian. Ian's sighting, this is from 2015. Real quick and to the point. I was reeling in a bass and I went to pull it into the boat and the monster ate my fish.
I think Ian's trying to save face in front of his friends.
I think Ian, yeah, I think Ian had a real slow day
Yeah.
and that was the best way to say he didn't get any fish that day. Um,
You know what? Next time we go out, because
yeah,
I
that's the
definitely, there
excuse
have
I'm going
been
to
some
start
times
using.
I'm pretty sure I just caught a little snag,
Yeah,
but I want to believe it was a fish. And I tell
we
you,
should.
you've heard me shout, and then it was a snag. And
That's
sometimes I'll report the snag, and sometimes I'm just like, you know what?
that was
I'm
just
gonna
that big
let
of
this one
fish.
go. I'm gonna let Brendan believe I just am not good at fishing.
Yeah, that's what we should start. That should be like our code now for snagged is up. Norman's out there. Net Normie.
Yeah, I
Normie's
kind
in
of
the
like
creek.
that.
Um, so someone else who likes to party is Nate, also from Denver, North Carolina. I was on a jet ski a few weeks back when I first moved down here with my girlfriend, and while we were out in the lake, we both saw a large body come to the surface. It was dark, shiny, and in some spots, and it had some spots on it, and was at least 14 feet long. I hauled ass past it and came to a stop a little further away from the spot where we were both scared to death at. I said, "Did you see that thing?" We both saw it, and she was scared to swim there from there on out.
All right,
So
Nate, you
it's
say, huh?
Nate.
All right, Nate.
That is
Okay.
Nate.
Now I
Um,
want to know, does Nate know this is a man-made lake?
I don't know if Lake knows that. Now here's one that is on the other end of the spectrum. I want to see what you think about this one. Another
I'm made
fishing one.
entirely of
You
ears.
guys, yeah, you guys could tell I'm focusing on the fishing ones because I think that's where some of these answers are. I was fishing with my friend. This is from Jordan McClavin from Mooresville, North Carolina. Way to put your name on it, Jordan. I was fishing with my friend on the beach near our house after school. While we were fishing, something grabbed onto my buzz bait and the line snapped. So I went to go look for it and saw something shiny. I looked and saw an 8 foot long gar.
Okay, now here, okay, I'm going to pause there
Mm-hmm.
because I like that. I do give, there's people that fish, there's people that are a little more involved. This
Mm-hmm.
guy sounds a little more involved.
Mm-hmm.
Identifies a gar. Gar are big long fish. I don't know if they're a gar in this lake, but I trust this guy. And yeah, especially things like alligator gar.
Well, yeah,
They can scare
that's
you. That's a
right.
monster. That's
You're
a
right.
bona
I
fide
mean,
monster.
alligator gar have a very like they're you see them a lot in the South and everything. Not a lot, but they're in the South. And yeah, they can be 300 pounds and 10 feet long in some cases. I mean, that's a huge one, but they do get to be that size. And I think this sighting that's logged on the normanlakemonster.com or whatever, you have someone who sees an alligator gar. Like that's what they know that's what it is. And they are still reporting it as a sighting of Normie. What that tells me about the culture down there is there are people who are tuned into this lake who are savvy that equate an alligator gar with Normie.
Well,
So
and real quick, I'm gonna tell
yeah.
you, I'm looking at there's a catfish angler forum. It says an alligator, the world record alligator gar, 302 pounds, over 7.5 feet long. I'm trying to
Oh
think, and
wow. Okay.
yeah, there are gar in the lake, but oh, I thought that was never mind, false alarm, people. But apparently there are gar
Gar in the
in
lake.
Lake Norman.
Okay. Yeah. And so I mean but I think it's important that like we have people that are saying like, "Oh, here's a gar. Oh, it's Normie." So I think that like how people identify these creatures and how they are kind of like the taxonomy of it is kind of important when we're talking about these things because like let's say it is an alligator gar, or let's say it is a some kind of large catfish like a blue cat or a channel cat or something like that. Do we have people in this area that just refer to almost any abnormally large fish as Normie? Now, an interesting thing along with abnormally large fish, one of the things I thought it was interesting to bring up is in a lot of these places, you have people mention that, like a lot of man-made lakes and reservoirs, there is a nuclear plant attached to Lake Norman. It's the McGuire nuclear plant. And you have people who say that, oh, Normie is a mutated fish that is, of giant size, which I think is a kind of like a miscarriage of people understanding what mutations are in natural creatures.
Right.
Um, that's something that you see in like, I don't know, The Simpsons or like, Hollywood or comics.
Well,
But
I
like,
will say the other end is you do see like from the Bikini Atoll test and the sailors
mhm.
and everything. I remember watching a documentary and there was one guy whose leg did swell up to abnormally
Yes.
sized, but the
Yeah.
skin split and he died.
Right.
And why is one fish selected for that?
Right. Yeah. Anything that is mutated like that to be that big, let's say that does happen. It's not going to last and it's going to die and it's not going to be reproducing. There's not going to be a resident population of abnormally large fish due to
Too
like
sad for a children's
nuclear.
book.
Well, right. Exactly. Well, one is two advertisements, but two, this seems like in this case, this is a lake that people are using a lot and are recreating on and swimming in and living on. You
Arvada,
would,
Colorado,
right. Yeah.
where
That's
there's
no, that's
tritium in the water and you
right.
can swim in it, you just can't wade.
Yeah, right. But so, like, I think that if there was a nuclear leak, folks would know about it quicker than seeing an abnormally large fish,
I don't
you
know,
know.
but I
But
but I
who
but I
knows? Yeah.
agree with you. Like that is not a good enough
Like
explanation for
that's not
me.
a good explanation for this.
No, that's
So,
not realistic.
right. So, so I think that kind of leaves us with a few options that we haven't talked about yet that I think is worth talking about. In now at least in the ones that I read about with Normie, I didn't see many that sounded aggressive, but there are some that do sound like they're not just like super nice. Like that kid who said that the alligator guard took his buzzbait, So with some of the ones that sound like that it is something that's chasing people while they're on their jet skis or while they're water skiing or anything like that, or diving, that brings up one of the options that's something that people aren't typically used to seeing that is relatively new to especially the southeast, and that are snakehead.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes. I am so happy
we got there.
we got one because it's my understanding that it's in the Central PA in the Chesapeake Bay
Hmm.
watershed that
Yes.
you can get higher if you bring them in. There's like a bounty on them.
Yep.
And these things look wicked.
Yeah.
One, it's an invasive species, so that's bad
Yes.
enough. Two, they look wicked and they can live outside water and
Hmm.
migrate. They can live outside
Over.
water for a couple days, I want to
Yeah, it's like
say.
days. It's a long time. It's
Yeah,
like,
this
yeah.
these snakehead fish.
And they kind of look like bowfin, which is a normal occurring species in the United States. It's a certain type of fish that if you think about like when we say a snakehead, it's basically a head with jaws, looks like one long kind of tail, and just like two little front flippers.
And
They
they're
look like
jerks.
they're super aggressive, and they look like a predator. When you see it, you're like, ah, that thing would bite me. Now they don't get 15 feet. They don't get 15 feet, but they're not a small fish. And I think they get 20, 30 inches in some cases. I mean, maybe bigger, but not huge. But again, they're so aggressive that could they be causing lots of people thinking like, oh, something came after me was in the water and it just looks bigger than it is,
Now I
something
like
like that.
this. I want to switch gears a little bit here
Hmm.
because Lake Norman, the normal monster, I do like when you look up Lake Norman State Park, the first photo on TripAdvisor, it's just a chill cat enjoying his vacation from the plant. He's just hanging out. So I
That makes me
appreciate
happy.
that. I thought you would, so I
Well
wanted
done,
that
Lake
be
Norman. That makes me,
photographers. Yeah.
yeah, it makes me happy. Now,
So
so
let's switch gears
yep,
because again, your snakehead thing and an invasive thing, I like that.
yeah.
I anytime anything underwater bites you and you don't know what it is, Assume the
Hmm.
worst.
Right.
You came across one that I did not also stumble upon, and I know nothing about it other than it might be the single greatest name in all of cryptidom.
So
Break it down for me.
it's a great name. So we are now going to talk about Harry the eel pig. Harry the eel pig.
Half eel,
Half
half
pig,
pig, all
all hair.
hair.
You beat me to it. So, this particular cryptid we're talking about, this takes place in Lake Harrington. This is in Kentucky, so we're staying in the southeast.
Stay in
Uh,
Appalachia.
Right. So this is another man-made lake. How this one was made was the Kentucky utility companies dammed the Dix River, which is a tributary of the Kentucky River, which is a large river that flows into the Mississippi. In 1925 is when this started. So, like a lot of these rivers or a lot of these dams and reservoirs, average depth of this one is 80 feet with a max depth of 250.
That's pretty
Um,
big.
yeah, that's big. Yeah, like that's bigger than most of these. Now, it only covers 2,300 acres, which compared to some of these large man-made lakes you guys find when you look them up, there are ones that are obviously much, much larger. But 2,300 acres is not a small body of water. This is better than some of the stuff that we found that has lake monsters living in things that are basically glorified ponds that are like 5 feet deep. So when it comes to like a large natural creature, at least makes a little bit more sense. Harry the eel pig is supposed to be, he's called an eel pig because he's supposed to have the body of an eel, but he has a pig-like snout on his head and a curled tail, has kind of like a light speckled colored body, 12 to 15 feet long, and super fast. Think like these snakeheads we were just talking about. He's basically a giant muscle with a pig head on the front. When you say it like that, it sounds kind of scary.
Yeah,
Um,
it's just it's scary in the way that a Chimera is scary, in the way
yes,
the brown Jinkin is unsettling.
exactly. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just like you're like, those aren't things that I would normally want to mix together. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read because you guys know we love, love, love old news articles. I'm going to read now something that comes from. So this article comes from 1972, and this is an article from the Courier Journal. So this is one of the more famous early accounts, and this is from a professor named Dr. Lawrence S. Thompson. I'm not going to read the entire article because there are sections in the middle of it that, frankly, I don't understand what they're talking about. It's something referencing a ongoing series that isn't going to be quite our cup of tea here. So, this is by again Joe Ward of the Courier Journal, Lexington, Kentucky. Professor Lawrence S. Thomas, who teaches classes at the University of Kentucky, keeps a second house on Harrington Lake about 30 miles south of here. And sometimes on the quiet stretch of water between Chestnut Bridge and Wells Landing, a few miles down the lake, he sees a monster taking a leisurely swim in the early morning hours. As the professor describes it, it's not a particularly fearsome monster. In fact, in the 4 years he's lived on the lake, he felt there was something out there. He's come under the impression that the creature is quite shy. All he's ever seen of it is a snout, not unlike that of a pig, moving along just above the water about the speed of a boat with a trolling motor, and a curly tail, similar to that of the same animal, coming out of the water about 15 feet behind. He explained in a recent interview, marked by its scholarly approach and multisyllabic vocabulary, that it's a monster only in the sense that you'd call an alligator or crocodile a monster if nobody else had ever seen one. Actually, he said, he has no idea what it is, but he knows there are no fish that big in Harrington Lake, and he leans towards the theory of his own that is might be a type of creature that has somehow escaped observation by men since its prehistoric ancestors swam up the Mississippi and Ohio rivers millennia ago. He backs up the possibility with some layman's knowledge of zoology and miscellaneous information from the shelves of Kentuckiana that nearly fill the large basement under the Lexington home and overflow into the Harrington Lake House. There is, for example, evidence that, oh, this is the part I'm going to skip. Thompson pointed out that there is no question that the creature can stay out of sight if it wants to, as evidenced by the marathon stealth of a monster fish called the coelacanth, which we have talked about before. Scientists have known about the coelacanth, whose lobe-like fins made them think one of the forms of an ancestral stock for land-dwelling animals. But until one was caught in South Africa in the 1940s, scientists thought the creature had been extinct for 60 million years. Thompson thinks that a lobed-finned fish can hide out that long in a heavily traveled ocean. Maybe an unassuming monster could do the same in a quiet cave off the Dix River in central Kentucky. And the article goes on to kind of speak about this guy's kind of credentials and some of the other work that he's done. That being the first time you're hearing of kind of that guy's take, Nick, what are some of your initial thoughts?
When was that again?
1972.
Okay. I don't know. I don't know what to make of that.
So I
Uh,
think,
are there
yes.
additional sightings?
So there are additional sightings. A lot of them sound exactly the same,
So do
where
you think
people,
there's an archetype that's being made and now like the
that's
grays and everything and
right. It kind of seems like that. Now there are sightings before him of what people just say are, from what I can find, are just kind of large fish. People do reference monsters in the lake prior to that. There are people who think that, and it seems like this gentleman, I can't tell if it says in the article that he's the one who kind of came up with the idea that whenever they made the lake, it flooded these limestone caverns um, in the area, and it kind of like flushed this creature out.
well, and there are a lot of interesting cave animals that
Ye-
live in the caves of Kentucky, which of
yes,
course has, I believe, the largest
the
known
Mammoth Cave
mammoth
system.
caves, which
Yep.
I have been
Oh,
multiple
really?
times, believe it or
Oh,
not.
cool. Okay, I
Yeah.
didn't realize that. That's
Haven't
cool.
been there probably I think I was 14 the last time I was there, so
Hmm.
it's been some time. But I remember specifically seeing like shrimp or something like it,
Okay.
some sort of
Yeah.
crustacean thing, and they were pure white. It was really
Oh,
interesting.
wow.
Yeah.
Which again, you wouldn't be used. Yeah, that's a pretty not a normal thing for someone to see.
No. So honestly, so here's where I can entertain.
Hmm.
And I once heard somebody say something to the effect of that cryptozoology is self-defeating because the moment something is demonstrably shown to be real,
Yeah.
it ceases to become a cryptid.
Hmm.
And it's my
Right.
understanding that things like silverback gorillas and pandas, more recently than we probably like to or imagine,
Right.
were classified as such. I've heard and seen videos of like gazelle type things that have a weird breathing apparatus.
Hmm.
I could kind of entertain that flooding parts of Kentucky could have opened up aquatic cave dwelling things
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
other,
That's
that
that's
kind of
not un
whole.
that's yeah, it's still a wild notion, but you can
Right.
see the steps that a you can see the steps that most people could follow to be like, okay, yeah, like that totally could happen.
Like I
Um
don't know how likely it is to yield you a creature
a
that
15
large.
foot long pig-faced
Right.
eel.
It's
Yeah.
right
That's
because
a
it gets
little,
down
yeah.
to the environs
Yeah.
that exist deep in caves are not
Hmm.
exactly really conducive to supporting something getting that big. That's
Right.
not being a biologist. That's
Right.
my understanding.
So yeah,
Yeah.
things don't get that big because they match their environment. Um, Now, in what I saw some people saying was that it's something that wasn't originally that big, but since it now has this huge lake to live in, the population is growing in size because they have more food and they're adapting quickly or whatever. Which again, I don't know if I'm not enough of a biologist to know if
I don't
things
think it
can
works that
grow.
fast.
Yeah, I don't think it works that fast. Yeah, I'm not an expert, but I don't think it works that fast because you do get gigantism in animals that are on like islands and stuff sometimes in populating like breeding populations. But that seems like again, you're kind of compounding your variables here. to use that excuse. But again, you're at least going down like an established path. Like things like this kind of can happen. One of the things that people bring up again that we've talked about already are both the idea of alligator gar that come up the Mississippi, actual alligators that come up the Mississippi. Now, once you have the river flooded, you then have better access to the Kentucky River and then the Mississippi and everything. So, is it possible that creatures that were, when I say creatures, I literally mean any natural occurring creature, now has access to this large reservoir? So, I mean, you can see people back in the 30s seeing things that they weren't used to seeing in this new lake, That's not a crazy way for these kind of stories to start.
I agree with you.
Yeah, you can see kind of where that folklore
Well,
kind of builds up.
pause real quick because we talked about the birth of folklore really early on in
Mm-hmm.
our conversations
Yep.
when I believe when Mike was around with the Peninsula Ohio python, where
Yes.
it was
Yes.
almost certainly a real incident in which a abnormally large snake not native to the area had gotten loose. There seems to be clear documentation that that happened. And then there
Mm-hmm.
were a series of sightings immediately surrounding the time that it occurred, and then they kind of peter off. But now people still say they see it, even though that's just highly unlikely for a
Right.
variety of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I that makes me think of that. So, I think your statements though are completely reasonable.
Yeah, and one of the things that I didn't see when I was looking up this article in particular, but something a little kind of like excuse or reason rabbit hole that I went down that I thought could actually make sense for this because it's something that is coming out of the top of the water that people aren't seeing. Because again, most fish don't breach on a normal basis. They're not usually things aren't
Right.
usually coming out of the water.
I mean,
Uh,
there's certain that will for
the
feeding or
will
variety
for
of reasons,
feeding,
but
but
even
even
then, it's not
yeah,
the majority of their
yeah,
activity.
even with feeding, it is a small percentage of their normal feeding habits. Now, one of the things I thought was interesting came up a few other places looking at other monsters. Again, this is the idea of these reservoirs actually opening up bodies, creating bodies of water, but also gaining access to other, tributaries and rivers and things getting to places where they haven't been before. Um, are you familiar with the idea of bull sharks or other sharks coming up the Mississippi?
Yeah, they come up, especially in the brackish area, the in the deltas and everything. Yeah,
Yeah. So there have been bull sharks that have come up the Mississippi as far as Alton, Illinois.
I that's that's pretty impressive.
Over 1,000 kilometers, 700 miles. Yeah. They've had them in St. Louis. I didn't know that. That seems like a pretty wild fact, Not saying that what people are seeing in Harrington Lake is a bull shark, but the idea of sea creatures making it that far up into these waterways, some of them that are huge, like the Mississippi is a huge river. These other areas are huge, so these man-made places have access to the Gulf.
It's not
Yeah,
unprecedented.
yeah,
Let's
it
put it
would.
that way.
Right, yeah, it's not unprecedented. So, like, I think that's an important thing to kind of like just kind of like keep in context that like people can be seeing something that is a natural creature that we would say, oh, well, that's so far out of its natural range. And it's like, well, yes, it is out of its natural range, but not out of its possible range. I think
Yeah, I see where you're going there.
those are two different things.
And it's rare enough, but still possible that it really catches the eye when it happens.
Right.
It becomes a fracas.
Right, exactly. So I think that this whole thing with Harry is an interesting one because it when you first look at it, it sounds so out there. Because again, the photos, if you not the photos, the kind of like renderings, if you all out there look them up, it's imagine a pig face on an eel, it looks pretty wild. But when you start looking at the size of the lake and everything, and just some of the stuff around it, and you look at this guy Lawrence Thompson's accounts and a lot of the other accounts that are out there, you're like, okay, like you can see how reasonable people would at least get into this and want to investigate it. Kind of like what you said with Loch Ness. I don't think there's been the dearth of research done on Harrington Lake as there has been with something like Loch Ness. But you can understand people who are real flesh and blood researchers wanting to look into these kind of things. It's not, because again, even if you don't find something paranormal and you do find something normal, what if there is, a manatee or a dugong or something in this lake?
A
Like,
dugong?
hold on. Is that just a Pokemon? No, there's a dugongs are also like manatees. They're both large, slow, and gentle herbivores that are often called sea cows. They're closely related and belong to the order Sariana.
Okay, well, I've learned
So
something. I've learned something
I,
new. But I'm gonna
I,
say this.
yeah,
I'm gonna
yeah.
say this. I still think monsters and man-made lakes are a silly business. I can see like this where we flood areas deliberately, how it could
Mm-hmm.
open up to some other life. I think it's a bit of a stretch. I think that if you're going, it's like the alien thing.
Yeah.
I think if we find extraterrestrial life, particularly within our solar system, it is most likely going to be bacterial or insect at most. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think it's going to be of the large variety. I
No, I think
think when you're going cryptids, I think if you want a higher success rate, go small.
yes. I think that is a great point, especially when we're talking about this from like the flesh and blood kind of standpoint. As a lot of these people are when they're talking about these things, they're not really talking about them like, again, like spiritual creatures or anything that is on the woo side of things. Which again isn't an explanation that we've kind of gone into at all tonight. Like with the spiritual side of things, again, we didn't talk much about any of the native perspectives on any of these things. I think it's interesting that they did reference in this article from 1972 with this gentleman. They talk about the coelacanth and how it was thought to be previously extinct. It was thought to be previously extinct by Western scientists. If But we know that if you talk to the actual fishermen in South Africa,
Yeah, and
they
in
were
Japan,
in Japan. Yeah, they were very aware of these creatures.
good conversation.
Absolutely. So, if any of you out there have seen a lake monster, especially if you've seen a lake monster in a man-made lake, we would
You
love to
need to
hear about.
defend yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we really want to know about it. We'd love to talk to you. So you can find us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at the Ghost Furnace Podcast, or you can send us an email at the Ghost Furnace Podcast at gmail.com.